All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I'm Michelle, and usually Diana would be with me, of course, but she is actually at an author's event this evening. So I get Margaret Verble all to myself tonight. We're going to be talking about her latest novel, which, of course, is Stealing. And thank you so much for making time for us. Well, I am very excited to have you here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here too.
Now, for our listeners who may not yet be familiar with Stealing, can you give us an overview of what it's about?
Yes, it's a first-person narrative told from the perspective of a young girl who is, it's set in the 1950s, and she lives out in the country. Her mother, unfortunately, has passed away, and she lives with her father, and he gets in some trouble. And she is removed from the home as a consequence of that. And she comes from a Cherokee family, and her family, of course, wants her with them, but there's a real struggle over that in the novel, and that's at the center of the novel.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was reading at the first few chapters of the book, and I had to stop and write this question down because I just love voice, the way that you write her voice and the way that you pull the reader into her world, and just like little like the word selection, the word choice, and the way that Kit phrases things that just really lets you know that you're in her world, you're viewing the world through her eyes. I think for some reason, one thing that that really stood out to me was the way that she observes Bella for the first time, and she determines that she is not from this, that she's not from the country. She's not a country woman because this is the woman who plucks her eyebrows. And I just loved that small detail that Kit immediately picks up to help her kind of form this initial impression of Bella. How did you approach writing that voice for Kit and creating that voice for her in the novel?
Well, I wish I could say that it was that I spend a lot of time on craft on it, but the truth is that the voice just sort of came to me out of the sky, and it was with me from the very beginning of the novel, from the time that Kit sees that rooster
Mm-hmm.
in the road, on the side of the road. I knew who I was dealing with, and she she I mean, she just came full blown, which is not true of other characters that I've written. Mostly characters have to be developed through a course of revision, but Kit was just there and stayed there unwaveringly throughout the book and throughout the revisions of the book.
And was she the first character to come to you for this story?
Yes, absolutely. She came right down that road at the very beginning, and the story was written really in the sequence in which it eventually has been published.
Okay, and that's really interesting. I know the characters don't always show up and say, hey, this is who I am. Normally, a lot of times, maybe not normally, but a lot of times they make you work for it to get to know them. Which character for you in this novel was the most difficult, the most stubborn to get to know?
Well, I think the ones that were maybe they weren't stubborn to get to know, but the ones that were I would say, sort of haziest are Kit's aunts. And one of the things I wanted to do was to delineate them from one another. And so, I worked with them a lot to get them delineated. I changed their names several times, and did all sorts of things with them, because I wanted them to be, I wanted them to have distinct personalities.
It's so interesting how I've had a character, I'm not published, but I write, and it sounds for someone who has never tried to write a book or been interested in writing a book, it sounds like it could sound like the picking a character's name could be so arbitrary. Just pick a name and that's because you're creating this person, it's from your imagination, so you can give them any name that you want. But you can feel it in your gut when the name isn't right for the character.
Right, right. You absolutely can.
So how many, do you remember some of the names that her aunts had before you figured out what they were called?
Well, to tell you the truth, I can't remember what I called them when I finally finished the book, because I wrote this book 14 years ago.
Oh, did you really?
I did. But I called them, I called them Lucy, I called Rosa, Sarah, Sally.
Oh, definitely not.
I had a lot of names for them.
So was this book written before your other books were written? Because I know your first book, and now of course it's Maud's Line, came out in 2019, if I'm remembering correctly.
It came out in 2015.
15. So
Yeah.
what's the timeline for writing?
Well, I have 4 published novels, and Cherokee America, which was the second one, which came out in 2019. I wrote it first.
Okay.
And then I wrote Stealing. And then I wrote Maud's Line. And then I wrote When Two Feathers Fell from the Sky.
Okay.
And they're published in the order of Maud's Line, Cherokee America, When Two Feathers Fell from the Sky, and Stealing.
So what was it just the right time for those stories in the order that they were published, or how did that happen that they were published so differently from when you wrote them?
Well, there's a different story for each novel,
Mm-hmm.
but for Stealing, I wrote Stealing back in 2006, 2007. And I decided I needed to go to a writer's workshop and have a real writer look at it, because I hadn't published anything at the time. And I did. I went to a writer's workshop, to the Wesleyan Writer's Workshop, and Roxana Robinson read it, and she said, you're already a fine writer. This is a fine manuscript. And she started trying to help me get an agent for it, and I started trying to get it published. And I recognized fairly soon that while the people I was sending it to liked it, they really did not understand what I was writing about. Mm-hmm. And what, of course, I was writing about is Native children being removed from their families and sent to boarding schools. And the American public, unless you're Native, they didn't know that. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that I was sending it up to a bunch of people who just had no idea that I was writing about something that was real and a real problem. So I just tucked it away and just left it on my desktop on my computer. And then when the story broke up in Canada about the boarding schools up there, mm-hmm. I realized it was the time to mention that I had this story. And so I talked to my agent and said, Lynn, I have a novel about this. And she says, you've got a novel already written about this? I said, yeah, I wrote it years ago. And she said, send it to me. And I said, well, I haven't looked at it, and I haven't looked at it in over a decade. So let me look at it again and send it to you. So I looked at it for about 3 weeks, and she finally, she pestered me and said, send it to me now. And so I sent it. to New York, and she immediately sold it.
Wow, that's incredible. What was that like, just to kind of go back? I mean, but in that time frame, you published 3 books, and I'm sure, I feel like as a writer, your writing changes with each story, and then from the books that you read and the conversations you have with other writers and readers, all of that, and of course experiences and just the world, really influences and informs the writing. What was that like to go back and see one of the first things that you wrote?
Well, I did not change that book very much. I think I added about 4,000 words to it, which is really hardly anything. Of course, if you're a writer, 40,000 words is not a lot of writing. And that was just, a small description kinds of things that I inserted. But if I had written that book last year, I would have written it exactly the same way. It is just almost fundamentally page for page the same book I wrote years ago.
That's amazing. I love that. And what does it mean to just see it out in the world and be able to have people experience it and be able to, get in touch with you and give feedback and just see it out in the world like that?
Well, it was only published in February, on February the 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And I left the country on February the 14th and stayed out of the country for 3 weeks. So which was coincidental. And so I haven't really, this is pretty recent. I haven't really had much to do about the book. I did one reading down at Parnassus in Nashville. I'm from Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
And then I left the country. I went to Egypt. And
Oh, wow.
since I've come back, I've had to do some other kinds of work. Next week, I'll go to Tulsa and do another book event. And I've done some interviews like I'm doing with you. But I really haven't faced an audience, except one time with this book. It's just so newly out. I don't really know. I'm worried. I'm a little bit worried because it's gotten such wonderful reviews. I want it to live up to the reviews, and I want people to like it as well as the New York Times likes it. But I don't know yet if they will.
Well, it's a beautiful book, and I also think that should be just a standard practice for authors to go on vacation immediately following Pub Week. I feel like that's the perfect way to unwind after the whole stress and chaos of getting a book published.
I know. I can't tell you how glad I was to get out of the country.
And 3 weeks sounds like the perfect vacation time. Not too long, but long enough to actually relax on vacation.
Uh-huh.
Oh, of course, you mentioned this is your 4th book, and they're all historical fiction, and they range from like the late 1800s to stealing is in the 1950s. From a writer's standpoint, now, of course, I know now that you wrote them in a different order, but jumping from one to such a close time frame, from one decade to another, is that challenging to kind of switch your mind and be like, okay, this is the technology, this is the fashion now, this is the style of speech and the way that people would speak in this decade, from one story to another?
Well, you have to do some research about that. I had to do some research about the 1920s. And Maud's Line and When Two Feathers Fell from the Sky both are set in the 1920s. Two Feathers is set in 1926, and Maud's Line is set in 1928. And I did have to do some reading about the 1920s because I obviously didn't know anything about it. And so that was fun mostly. I mean, to look at that language, to look at the styles, to look at what people actually thought was neat or cool or whatever, was really interesting to me. And I was fortunate in that once I had done that research for Maud's Line, then when I started doing the research for Two Feathers, I already had all that background in my head about the 1920s. So it was pretty easy to pick that as a decade to set Two Feathers in.
And now, speaking of research, when it came, well, do you, since you wrote years ago, do you remember what kind of research you did to help build the story for Kit and her experiences?
Well, I didn't actually have to do hardly any research for that book. I did a little bit of research on the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some research on what year was it that like Davy Crockett was popular, that kind of thing. And then after I finished the first draft of the book, I read a couple of books on Indian boarding schools just to be sure, or to see if there was something I was missing. But those are on government Indian boarding schools, and I sent Kit off to a Christian boarding school, mm-hmm. which in the decade in which she lives in for our tribe would be the kind of school that she'd wind up in rather than a government boarding school. So other than that, I didn't do any research for that novel at all.
Okay. And I'd love to talk about tone for a second, because this book, it almost feels like there's background music to the book, if that makes sense. You can just feel the mood, feels like a physical presence throughout the story, that because you don't know exactly what happened, you have these moments where Kit kind of mentions little things to tell the reader, something clearly happened, but you don't know what yet. You know that she's somewhere where the kids are mean, and the only place that she feels safe is the closet, but you have no idea how she ended up there. And for me, for a writer, creating the mood can be so challenging. Creating it, maybe not, but maintaining it throughout a whole entire novel can be really challenging. Do you have a trick to kind of get into the mindset when you sit down to write every day, or is that more kind of in the editing process?
Well, in this novel literally came to me out of the sky. I didn't have to work on any of that, but I know exactly what you're talking about because, like, of course, I'm writing every day now, and I'm having to do just exactly what you said about work with the mood and that kind of thing and the tone of it. And it's not always as easy as it was in Stealing, and I had to work with the tone of Two Feathers too, and Cherokee America. Maud's Line sort of came the same way that Stealing came. I just knew it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do. I mean, I write every morning. I mean, it's I get up, I eat breakfast, I sit down, and I write,
Mm-hmm.
and I write, whatever comes out, and then I get up and have the rest of my day. And over the course of drafts, then generally the mood, a kind of mood, wins out. So that's a revision thing.
Mm-hmm. So you're a morning writer versus a night writer.
Oh yeah, I'm no good at night. You know.
Diana is she's a night owl. So she'll write from like 11 o'clock to like 1 or 2 in the morning. And I don't know how she does that because my best writing is between, I want to say, like 6 and 9 o'clock in the morning. That's probably my best
Yeah,
writing.
yeah, that's when my best writing is too. And I think that's because that when you get up, you're closer to where you were when you were dreaming.
Hmm.
And there's for me, my mind is just more open and fluid than it is later in the day when I have all these tasks I need to do and all these interactions. But yeah, I don't see anybody writes at night, but some people evidently do.
Yeah, no, I definitely
Yeah,
can't do it
yeah,
because especially like you say, once the to-do list starts, once you have to start adulting for the day, that's,
it's over.
yep.
Yeah.
So, and this may, I feel like my questions may not apply because this isn't a story that, this is a story that you wrote several years ago, but I'm going to ask them anyway.
Okay.
Um, what for you, what was an or was there an unexpected challenge that you weren't anticipating to writing during the writing process? And if it was, how did you get through it?
Well, the only unexpected challenge I had when I was writing this novel, and I wrote this novel in just a very few months, but I was flying back and forth to the United Kingdom the entire time and I was working. So I would be writing here in the US and then I'd be going off to the United Kingdom and working for about 3 weeks at a time and then coming back to the US and having to pick up writing that novel again. Now, of course, that's not normal. Most novelists don't do that, but that was the only impediment. If I had not been flying back and forth to the UK and working so hard, I could have probably written this novel in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, I know it's not normal. I hope your listeners don't think that's normal because it is, as you and I both know, that is not normal.
No. Do you, for your other novels, have they all been as not easy because still writing any book is not easy, but as did it come to you as easily while you were writing?
No, not at all. Maud's Line more so than the other two, but when I sit down to write a novel, I never know what's going to happen. I'm not one of these people that outlines what's going to happen, then writes from the outline. I have no idea
Me
what this character
neither.
is. And so it's really, it's sort of like feeding a pill to a cat. You just never know what's gonna happen, and there's usually a lot of struggle involved in it. So um, I've lost my train of thought. What was I got into thinking about feeding that pill to that cat. I was trying to explain something. I guess about it not always being so easy, and it's not.
No, there are days when the characters know exactly what they're doing that morning, and then there are days when they have they don't want to do anything.
No, they just wander around and they want to have little conversations that don't amount to anything. Uh, I just get so irritated with them. I'm going through that right now. Yeah, and then some days it's just like wham,
Hmm.
they know exactly what they're doing, and then they're taking me to places that I didn't expect to go. And then you can just hope that they figure out what they're doing in about 100,000 words. Uh, and sometimes they don't, of course. And then
Hmm.
sometimes, and you can see this in novels. You can see where the novelist has gotten to about 80,000 words and has no idea what to do and no control over the characters, and then artificially twists the novel around into a very unsatisfactory ending. Um, You know, those are the kinds of novels that need to be abandoned because they're just not gonna work. And of course, you don't know they're not gonna work
Mhm.
until you've invested months in them. So that's the difficult part of being a writer.
And at that point, it's like, okay, no, we have gotten this far. We are going to see this through.
Well, I know, but sometimes when I read other people's novels, I can tell that's what they've thought, and I've thought, oh God, I wish you didn't. I just wish you had abandoned this thing. And I do, I have 2 or 3 novels I've just had to abandon because it's just so clear that they're never going to straighten up and be decent novels. But
Do
you
you
don't know
save
it when
them?
yeah, I save them, and I've got one I keep going back to, and it doesn't get any better. It's still a terrible novel.
The characters still aren't ready to do anything for you.
Well, the characters are there and the plot's there, but the voice isn't there. And you've got the novel has to have a voice that
Mhm.
people can stand to live with throughout reading it.
Well, I love Kit. I just think she has such a unique, I just love the things that I love that she went out to watch ants when she didn't have anything else to do in the house. And she was just like, okay, I'm just going to go watch ants because they remind me of the pyramids. And an article that I read about building the ancient pyramids.
Well, I did. That's what one thing I did have to look up is when Life magazine ran that. That's a real thing. Magazine ran an
Oh,
article.
really?
Yeah, and I read it as a little girl, and of course that's why I was in Egypt, was to go see the pyramids.
Oh, I love that you went after the book came out.
Well, I had planned that trip before COVID, so I did.
Oh.
I did it. It was coincidental that the book came out, but I do remember as a child watching ants and thinking about the pyramids.
Oh, I love that memory came through into the novel for Kit.
Yeah.
So, and of course, now the book is out, and you mentioned, you're working on another story right now?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to tell us what that's about, or is it still very much just for you for
No, I
now?
can't tell you what it's about. I'm about 70,000 words into it, and I don't know if I'm going to have to, you know, um, if it's going to work out or if I'm going to have to kill it.
I think that takes a lot of self-awareness as a writer to go, okay, no, we're gonna have to try something else.
Well,
And strength.
yeah, it's always sort of sad when that happens, and I'm on the first draft of this novel, so I don't have any idea if that's going to happen. What's going to happen to this novel?
Well, I think you're probably one of the first historical fiction writers that we've talked to that is a pantser like me. Most historical fiction writers that we've spoken with do the outlines because it kind of that genre lends itself very easily and necessarily, depending on the storyline, to plotting and outlining and mapping.
Oh, is that right? Okay, you've just educated me because I didn't know that other historical fiction writers are doing that.
Oh, really? There's like a
Yeah,
whole group of historical fiction writers who are pantsers. I write fantasy, so I'm in my own happy little world.
yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting. No, I've the majority or they kind of fall in the middle where they'll do an outline, but they give themselves the freedom to wander away. If the characters want to go this way for a while, this is still where we have to end up, but if you want to take this route to get there, that's fine.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, no, I never write like that. My characters are like, suddenly one morning, one of them will do something. I think, well, where did that come from? And what am I going to do about it? So no, my characters are always leading me. I'm never leading them.
Do you know when you start a story, do you know how it's going to end? And you just
Don't have
let
any
them
idea.
figure it out?
Mm-mm,
Oh, I love that. I think that is awesome.
mm-mm. I did not, in this story, in Stealing, I didn't set out to write a story about a Native child going to a boarding school. I started out to write a story about a little girl walking down a dirt road. And that's where it ended up. And, of course, that's a logical place for it to end up. If a Native kid gets in trouble, they're much more likely to wind up taken away from their family than that would happen to a white kid. So that was a logical thing to happen. But I sure didn't know it was going to happen when I started out.
I think it's very exciting when you sit down to write and you're like, okay, guys, what are we doing today?
That's right. It's sort of like getting a pill down a cat.
Well, I know we're just about at our time, but everyone, Stealing is out in the world now. So if you would like to order your own copy, please be sure to check out the link to our bookshop on bookshop.org in our show notes. Bookshop.org, of course, supports our wonderful writers. It supports the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores out there. And Margaret, thank you so much for coming to hang out with me and letting me pick your brain about writing and this incredible book that you've written and put out in the world for us. I've had so much fun chatting with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope you continue to enjoy the book, and I appreciate you letting me come on.
Absolutely. Oh, did I freeze? Oh, no. I just thought Zoom was about to kick me out because normally when the other person freezes, that's my sign that I'm the one who actually froze.
Yeah, you did freeze.
Okay. So, but thank you so much for coming to hang out. It's been so much fun. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good
Have a
evening.
great night.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.